How's it going, guys? Today we're talking about Fallout. After having watched the entire series, I realized that there's new information being added to a long discussed topic among the Fallout fandom, which is who really dropped the nukes and began the Great War. Now, if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you're a fan of Fallout, that you know about the series, so I don't feel the need to give a summary of the entire Fallout universe. I will be explaining certain topics such as the Great War and vault-tec, as well as the social experiments that the vaults were made for. But now let's get into what led to the Great War that turned the world into a nuclear wasteland in the matter of hours. America saw great prosperity after the Second World War, in large part due to the world embracing atomic energy, leading to technological advancement only thought to exist in science fiction. This all changed in the second half of the 21st century when the resource wars began. The resource wars originated from a global dependency on petroleum and uranium, crucial for everything from fuel and electricity to plastics and medicine. As supplies dwindled and demand surged, nationalism and protectionism escalated. Ineffective interventions by the United Nations were highlighted in 2051 when the US invaded Mexico to secure petroleum, despite causing economic and political destabilization. This initial conflict was just the beginning of worldwide warfare, ironically worsening the US economy. The energy crisis became widely recognized after a documentary exposed the depleted oil fields in Texas, signaling a deepening crisis. Following the US intervention in Mexico, the European Commonwealth mirrored this approach by militarily confronting Middle Eastern oil exporters over price hikes in April of 2052. This initiated a nearly decade-long war over oil, leading to soaring oil prices and the bankruptcy of several smaller nations, which contributed to the collapse of the United Nations. The conflict, marked by nuclear exchanges after the destruction of Tel Aviv in December of 2053, heightened global fears of a thermonuclear war. In response, the US launched Project Safehouse, creating underground vaults to protect its population, although the project suffered from significant financial and administrative corruption, resulting in only 122 vaults being built, insufficient for even 0.1% of the US population. The war eventually ended in 2060 when the Middle Eastern oil fields were depleted, leaving the European Commonwealth fragmented and its former nations scrambling for remaining resources. After the Euro-Middle Eastern War ended in 2060, the United States, struggling with a resource crisis and the new plague, fortified its borders and pursued advanced technologies including AI, alternative propulsion, and nuclear fusion to boost its economy. Extensive military funding led to the establishment of the Anchorage Front Line in 2059 to protect Alaska's oil exports, exacerbating tensions with Canada and gradually eroding its sovereignty. The global situation worsened as oil scarcity halted most vehicle traffic, with only limited production of alternative energy cars. Despite accelerated fusion research, no solutions were found, but by 2063, most of the US vaults designed for population protection were nearing completion with regular drills underway. In August 2065, US military-funded research into power armor indirectly led to the development of the first crude fusion cell by 2066, which the US revealed shortly after halting fossil fuel trade with other nations. This affected China, heavily reliant on US oil, leading them to invade Alaska in December of 2066 to seize oil reserves, thus turning the Anchorage front line into a fierce battleground. Hindered by Canadian resistance to allow US troop movements, the conflict escalated until Canada eventually relented, setting a precedent for its later annexation. The US quickly deployed the first T-45 power armor suits in 2067, enhancing soldier firepower significantly despite the suit's limited mobility. China, attempting to catch up, lagged years behind in similar technology. Despite initial advantages, the conflict devolved into a grueling decade-long war of attrition, marked by trench warfare, guerrilla tactics, and severe human rights abuses, including the use of biological weapons. Canada, increasingly seen as Little America, suffered extensive resource exploitation and social unrest, ignored by both US policymakers and the broader international community. By 2072, Canada's resistance to American control escalated with riots and sabotage attempts against the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline, prompting the US to initiate military annexation. Over the next 5 years, Canada was transformed into an occupied territory, its resources and strategic position heavily exploited. In response to China's aggressive use of biological weapons, the US launched the Pan-Immunity Virion Project in 2073, which inadvertently led to the creation of the forced evolutionary virus, a major mutagenic agent in world history. Escalation intensified in 2074 when the US invaded China, aiming to undermine its war effort by opening a second front. However, logistical challenges and harsh conditions quickly dampened American hopes for a quick resolution. Continuous fighting in Alaska and Asia led to a stalemate in mounting casualties. By 2076, the full annexation of Canada was marked by violent suppression of protests and the complete military occupation of Canadian territories. The introduction of the T-51 power armor significantly boosted U.S. military capabilities, pressuring Chinese defenses. Despite military successes abroad, domestic unrest grew in the U.S., with food shortages sparking riots and the displacement of workers by automation, particularly in Appalachia, leading to widespread economic distress and the imposition of martial law, effectively turning the U.S. into a de facto dictatorship. The countdown to the Great War began with the Anchorage Reclamation in January of 2077, which saw American forces quickly redeployed both to China and domestically to quell riots and maintain order. The redeployment strained the U.S. military, leading to the closure of many mainland bases, which were converted into automated defense forts, while the garrisons were sent to the front lines in Asia, resulting in increased desertions, particularly among those tasked with riot control. By March, the U.S. political leadership, foreseeing the collapse, retreated to a Poseidon Energy oil rig to form what would become the Enclave. As society deteriorated, the military-industrial complex exploited the chaos, exacerbating tensions in regions like Appalachia where automation had displaced many workers. Violent clashes ensued between workers, corporate security forces, and the National Guard, reminiscent of historical labor conflicts. In Massachusetts, martial law and food riots added to the unrest, while Washington, D.C. experienced comparatively less chaos with only food riots. By October, the situation was dire. The Boston Bugle declared it the atomic ultimatum, criticizing the massive waste of resources and lives. This period culminated in the US launching a final offensive against China, which triggered the Great War, ending the resource wars through total nuclear annihilation. Now, before I talk about the information gleaned from the Fallout series, I wanted to briefly explain two organizations that are long theorized to be involved in the Great War. Before the war, the Enclave consisted of a secretive group of America's elite, including presidents, military leaders, top scientists, influential politicians, and wealthy industrialists. Esteemed by its members as the most formidable assembly of minds in the nation, the Enclave was seen by others, particularly in later centuries, not as a government entity but rather as a consortium of the wealthy and powerful who were determined to retain their influence at all costs. The Enclave utilized Project Safehouse and vault-tec shelters to conduct a grand social experiment under the Vault Behavioral Project, where they monitored and manipulated vault occupants from their technologically equipped oil rig. For instance, they prompted Vault 8 inhabitants to emerge and establish a city by sending an all-clear signal shortly after the war, while also observing the intact population of Vault 13, which would later prove significant. The ultimate goal of these experiments was to collect data for the development of a multi-generational starship, based on the assumption that Earth would become uninhabitable, necessitating human expansion into space for survival. Vault-tec Corporation, established as a major nuclear defense entity by 2031, transformed into a pivotal player by the 2050s amidst global crises such as the Euro-Middle Eastern War and the New Plague. With the initiation of Project Safehouse in 2054, Vault-tec was charged with creating nuclear fallout shelters across the US. Despite its lauded demonstration vault in Los Angeles, the project was marred by severe mismanagement, corruption, and embezzlement, with only 122 shelters built nationwide, covering less than 0.1% of the population, at exorbitant costs that far exceeded initial estimates. Vault-tec's influence extended beyond mere shelter construction. The company engaged in secretive and unethical experiments within these vaults, testing new technologies and social paradigms, ostensibly to redefine societal norms post-catastrophe. These experiments varied from the mundane to the deadly, designed not just to protect but to study human behavior under controlled, often cruel conditions. This dual role culminated in 2077, when despite frequent drills that led to public complacency, the Great War erupted, sealing the fate of those inside the vaults. While a few vaults functioned as intended and safeguarded their residents, most served as laboratories for the shadowy Enclave's broader, undisclosed ambitions. But from what I've told you so far, we still don't know who initiated the Great War. We know that China and the US were at war. We know the motivations of the Enclave and their future plans for humanity, as well as the true purpose of the vaults. But none of that gives us a definitive answer. Leonard Boyarsky, an art director who left the franchise after the development of Fallout 2, believed that it shouldn't matter who fired the bombs first. What's really important were the international conditions that led to the Great War. Tim Kaine, the original creator of the Fallout setting and lead programmer who likewise left the franchise during the development of Fallout 2, stated definitively in an interview in 2023 that his original vision was for China to drop the first bomb after learning that the US was creating a bioweapon. Of course, Tim Kaine was no longer in charge of the Fallout universe's canon by this point. However, the new Fallout TV series implies that Vault-tec was actually behind the dropping of the bombs. Throughout the series, we learn through the perspective of Cooper Howard that vault-tec may be more nefarious than the public was led to believe, culminating in the finale where his wife Barb convinces a council of investors, many of whom lead notable corporations from the Fallout universe, such as Robco and West-Tec, that the vaults will be successful, suggesting that they drop the bombs themselves in order to ensure their success. Now, even though this fits in with the vault experiments and the Enclave's goals, this still is not a definitive answer. This is a question that we may never truly have answered, but we can't say for sure. If the Fallout series gets a season 2, and the ghoul manages to reunite with his wife, I believe that we'll get that answer. But let me know what you guys think about these theories in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so that you never miss out on a new video. Thanks for watching.